Hi, and welcome back to Plan 9 Crunch, where today we are talking about a very important question, one that needs to be asked and needs to be answered more than that. And that question, I'm Joe Gibson, and that question is, between Jesus Christ and Gamera, who is the better savior of humanity? And okay, here on Plan 9 Crunch, or on our blog, plan9crunch.com, I've talked a lot about Gamera. You know I'm a fan of Gamera. In the cult genre space, I am in the cult of Gamera, the cult of Noriaki Yuasa, the main creative on the Showa Gamera series from 1965 to 1980. I haven't talked about Jesus, lest you think that I am coming at this from a place of bias, I brought this pin. You may not be able to see that. It says follower of Christ. So I know what I'm talking about a little bit when it comes to both of these savior figures. With that out of the way, the obvious question to ask, if you know the premise of Gamera, is which Gamera are we comparing to Jesus Christ? I mean, there's, 4 different continuities of Gamera? There, you got the Showa series, the Heisei series, Gamera the Brave, and Gamera Rebirth. But there might also be some different things to consider about Jesus, 2 different facets to consider, okay? So in the Showa series, Gamera starts off as a villain before letting his soft spot for children turn him into a superhero. Gamera Super Monster that carries forward those themes, reusing stock footage. It might be its own continuity. I think it's loosely in the Showa series. There's more to imply that those films happened than that they were just comic books, is all I mean about Gamera Super Monster. But it might be a new turtle, too. We'll talk about more later. The Heisei trilogy overtly played with religious imagery. So, Heisei trilogy between 1995 and 1999. It melds Eastern and Western religious imagery. And it tests the concept of having faith in an unknowable super turtle. Gamera the Brave and Gamera Rebirth emphasize children's role in a partnership with Gamera, and here's one thing that's very tantalizing to compare Jesus Christ and Gamera is Gamera is the friend to all children. Jesus is portrayed the same way. Now, which Jesus are we comparing to which Gamera? Most Christians, so this is not a controversial thing, regard him to be the same as the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh or Jehovah, who frankly is a very vengeful being. As well as being foreordained to carry out events later on, at least the way that people interpret them, that he's, Then Jesus in the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, at the start of the New Testament, is a more peaceful, and technically each Gospel has a different focus. In Mark, Jesus is seen as a normal man, called to be the Son of Man and Son of God at his baptism. Now, it's not irreconcilable. I don't mean to imply that there's irreconcilable differences here. Just different focuses. And Matthew highlights the Jewishness of Jesus, referencing Old Testament prophecies from Isaiah, from Micah, especially about him coming out of Egypt. So he does that in the backstory as a baby. And he's fulfilled the higher law, fulfilled the law of Moses. There's a higher law, this even stricter Jewish law in the Sermon on the Mount. And then Luke plays up the imperviousness of Jesus, while setting up Paul to lead the Church of Gentiles, not Jewish stuff. The Sermon of the Plains, which is the Sermon of the Mount, but different, doesn't really include all that stuff. Finally, John is a more divine, omniscient Jesus, being more eternal. You can nitpick my representations here, but it's just an important focus thing, because from film to film, Gamera can be emphasized to be more vengeful, more destructive, more caring, more creative. There's a lot more one-to-ones, but there is also examples too far off from what the characters generally represent, or figures, to include here. Like, Gnostic Apocrypha, Gnostic Christian Apocrypha, I should specify, and Gamera vs. Bargon. Gamera vs. Bargon from 1966 is the only film where Noriaki Yuasa did not direct. He still was the special effects director, but in Gamera vs. Giron, there is a stock footage compilation recap of the previous movies in Gamera's role with children and as a protector, as a savior of humanity, where he first attacks and saves a child from a lighthouse in the original Gamera in 1965. Then he saves that same child from Gauss as stock footage from 1967's Gamera vs. Gauss. And then finally protects all children from an alien invasion in Gamera vs. Virus in 1968. Gamera vs. Bargon is distinctly not included in that recap. And he makes more sense along those revisionist lines from that one movie than just, because in Gamera vs. Bargon, there's no child characters. It's a much grittier adult movie focusing on greed and how it corrupts people and how you can be redeemed from that corruption, but not through Gamera, through brooding. There's also blowjob imagery. I'm not going to go into that. And the monster that Gamera fights is born in that movie. Bargon is born from an egg that the greedy Onodera steals before passing off villain roles to Bargon. And that's a baby. It's a newborn baby that Gamera brutally murders in the title fight. So no, we're not including that here. The Gnostic Apocrypha is also very weird. Jesus having romantic love or some special intellectual love to Mary Magdalene over the rest of his disciples, or Judas over the rest, is from Gnostic Apocrypha. And here's the most tantalizing thing. Jesus becoming giant and having a talking cross sidekick when he arose from the tomb. That's from the Gospel of Peter, which is Apocrypha, it's Gnostic. Don't worry about that. We're just focusing on the main stuff that no matter what Christian affiliation you have or what version of the Bible you have, there should be some stuff in there that seems similar. Alright. So, okay, Old Testament versus Showa series. Yahweh seems to be a vengeful, wrathful, jealous God by his own word, who demonstrates a softer side to his behavior to those that worship him, saving some of his followers from the consequences of their actions, David. And but also, we can get into Jungian thought, which, okay, I have a Jungian analysis of Gamera versus Giron you can read on the blog, planetcrunch.com. It'll be linked in the description, and you can also see our second ever podcast episode here was about my dad and I discussing that article. Jung is an interesting figure because, he criticizes both Catholicism and Protestantism. He's on both sides, and on neither side. But he has very interesting thoughts about this Old Testament God. So, drawing to God is important in Jung's ideas. And that is because God can make us conscious. And a conscious man would also understand his anima, his inner woman, to display the positive characteristics that are associated with women in Jungian thought, and vice versa. But it disturbed Jung greatly to realize that God lacked those caring feminine traits until after the story of Job. So the answer to Job is directly relevant to how we're going to be viewing God and Gamera in this video. If you disagree with Jung, fair. So do I on a lot of things. It's just the way to compare Jesus Christ and Gamera is through Jung, right? So, in the story of Job, and the answer to Job, Jung talks about this. God and Satan are kind of having a little bit of a bet that if they torture Job and remove all of his possessions and wife and kids, that he'll abandon God, he'll shirk God, and then Job doesn't, so he gets rewarded with a new wife, new kids, new stuff at the end of the thing. We won't delve too much into how Job is constructed as a book. There's poetry segments and narrative segments, which are very interesting to study, but in any case, according to Jung, it is Job showing greater humanity than God that motivates God to become Christ, to become a perfect man, because there was a better man there. A very sacrilegious thought, but applicable to that aforementioned Gamera versus Neuron recap segment that shows an attacking monster saving a child and being motivated to protect those children, to take on the responsibility to protect and eventually die for those children, as Gamera dies in Gamera Super Monster. Also in Gamera vs. Neuron, he has some death and rebirth stuff, though he doesn't actually die, he just almost dies, he's mostly dead, not physically dead. And so, very direct one-to-one there. Gamera destroys the same dam 3 times in the Showa series. Old Testament Yahweh seems to be a lot more powerful. And the amount of times the Israelites get captured, it's more on them in the story of the Bible than it is on God. Whereas there are times where Gamera fails in the first round to protect the children in the Showa series from the alien invasions and the other monsters. So we'll give this round to Old Testament Yahweh and God. And I guess in my notes here, I have comparing Gamera Super Monster to the Gospel according to Mark. And that's because many scholars date Mark as the first one. Where you date the Gospels, or if you think it's a stupid question to date the Gospels or not, is kind of immaterial here. Basically, Mark, when viewed as the first Gospel, is a proto-Gospel. It's a prototype of Matthew, essentially, because Matthew then would write based on Mark, but expound on it. And Gamera Super Monster, or Space Monster Gamera as I think it's originally called, does feature probably unintentional religious themes. By this point, Noriaki also would have worked extensively on Ultraman. I'm fairly certain. He worked on Ultraman, I'm pretty sure it is between the Gamera kicks. So it's 1980 by this point, and Ultraman himself has some Christ-like attributes. I have not looked into it that much, but from what I've heard, it's not necessarily intentional. When you see Ultraman being crucified, it means something different than this is a Christ analogy. But, I mean, come on, he's getting crucified. Ultraman is framed as this both heavenly and both man, because he's a marriage of a heavenly alien that merges with a man upon accidentally killing. It's just weird. You should watch Ultraman after this. The original one, and then the stuff that Noriaki also worked on afterward. So coming with that into a new Gamera movie where Gamera sacrificed himself, he's the friend to this specific child, and he goes about doing his highlight reel, perhaps doing his miracles and taking out the monsters that he's already taken out on a fun little tour. I can see how you can consider it a prototype to the more overt religious themes that the Heisei trilogy, divorced from Yuasa, would consider. The Magatama beads in the Heisei trilogy are of more Eastern significance, but he is crucified in the second film, so we should jump to that. The Gospels, compared to Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, and Gamera, Advent of the Legion. I've heard it articulated that Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, is about finding faith in this new, heavenly, powerful creature. In that sense, then, Gamera, Advent of Legion is about reaffirming that faith, about putting your trust in him. And Legion is the villain. Legion, named after Legion from the Bible, which Godzilla, that's not the right person, which Jesus Christ cast out of a character. It goes into some swine that then, as you know, mentioned in the film, as a reference there. Legion is this collective of alien bug things, very creative, I should add. If alien life does exist that isn't human, it probably would be gas-powered, pneumatic insects, just realistically speaking. In any case, in that movie, the characters pray. Gamera has a priestess character in these movies, and she channels all this prayer through the Magatama bead, and he comes back to life. Sorry, I said he was crucified in this movie. He's not crucified in this movie. He just dies and comes back to life in this movie. He's crucified in the third movie, which I would almost want to compare to Revelation, because it features, again, a more destructive thing. Some people vehemently deny that the Old Testament God is Jesus. I feel like it's the consensus of the most branches of Christianity that it is so. But even if it isn't, Revelation still features a more destructive Jesus. That's just in the text. The text is very difficult to understand, and so too is Gamera 3. The incomplete struggle, or Wrath of Iris, or whatever you want to call it, really. The absolute guardian of the universe is the title card at the end of the movie, so that's about doubting the faith you have put in this omnipotent creature, because the Magatama bead broke at the end of the last movie because of the prayer. So this Gamera looks fiercer. He doesn't have the connection to Asagi, his priestess, anymore. And the Gyaos that were in the first movie have returned and are overrunning the Earth. He's stopped caring about collateral damage as he's hunting them down. The main character has a different perspective on the first film, where Gamera is the one that killed her parents due to collateral damage. So she bonds with this other being, Iris, that has its own Magatama bead type thing. And it's ambiguous, because it was created by the same Atlanteans that created Gamera, but which one was to be the good guy, which one was to be the bad guy? Iris, as she names this other being, feeds on her emotions toward Gamera, which spill out, causing untold mayhem and damage. But is that Iona, is the character's name, doing that, or is that Iris itself? It's very ambiguous up until the end if Gamera is still a good guy. But Gamera is the good guy, Iris is the bad guy, and we put our faith into Gamera one last time as he gets crucified. One-arm crucifixion by Iris's spindly tentacle spears. He blasts off his own arm, but then he gets a fireball arm instead. Punches Iris. It's a good movie, I don't mean to diminish it. But he's very weakened, and then all of the remaining Gyaos on the planet converge onto that one spot, and the government of Japan sends stuff to help Gamera, but that final closing image asks you to put your faith in Gamera in this end-time scenario, if he's going to win or if he's going to lose. So I didn't mention who gets the point for the Gospels versus the first two movies in the trilogy, and really both characters die and revive. Kind of a draw. But here's interesting, because we know, if we read Revelation, that Jesus wins. The armies of good, they win against the armies of darkness. We don't know if Gamera wins. But it's the same mechanism of faith that asks you to believe Jesus will win, that asks you to believe that Gamera won. That's also a draw, I would say. But there's a very interesting idea that's developing here, is this internal versus external salvation thing. Gamera defeats the monster to save us. Jesus Christ redeems the monster in us, or behind us. Get thee behind me, Satan. It's probably where he's at. However, Gamera the Brave shows a very interesting depiction of Gamera that I find to be in line with Noriaki Yuasa. I think that Noriaki Yuasa would love Gamera the Brave if he were alive to see it. It's 2006, I believe he died in 2004. I'll talk more about it eventually later, as its own video, as its own podcast, as its own blog post perhaps, but essentially, in the backstory to Gamera the Brave, 3 or so Gyaos were attacking a city. Gamera sacrificed himself, blowing himself up, to destroy them. You could view that as what would have happened at the end of Gamera 3, Attack of Wrath and Legion, I mean. But I want to believe he won, without having to die. So, there you go. Anyway, but that's in 1973, I want to say. And so, later, a character finds Gamera's egg in 2006, so that's 33 years after the thing. 33 being a very significant number for Christian ideas of Jesus. He was 33 years old in the main story of the Gospels is the tradition, I believe, and 333 angels in heaven being the number. So this Gamera is the child of the original Gamera, but also its own Gamera. So the son is both the father and not the father. That's just sort of like modalism, or sort of like Trinitarianism, or sort of like most Christian ideas about God and Jesus' relationships. But basically, the young kid, Toru Aizawa, is mourning his mother's death. So is his father, and Gamera mends their relationship because Toru's father saw Gamera when he was much younger. But there's also an undercurrent where Toru doesn't believe he'll see his mother again, that she's just gone. But due to his relationship with Gamera, there is a point where Toru even mentions that he maybe does believe that his mother is there somewhere. Whether or not Toru needs to become a theist or stay atheistic for the internal salvation to work there doesn't really matter. But the point is that something about Toto, which is what he calls this young Gamera, something about Toto redeems some internal flaw and failing of Toru, namely his depression and mourning of his mother. It helps him to heal. And he also helps Toto in that way. Toto, towards the end of the movie, contemplates doing the same self-destruction move that his father did. But Toru talks about it. It's a great movie. I'm kind of underselling it in terms of just focusing on how I can tie this into Jesus. Am I saying that Gamera beat Jesus at his own game? That's up for you to decide. But, okay, I'm sorry, this is an April Fool's video. This went on for this long, and because there's a serious discussion we could have on this, I think, in having it go on this long. Let us know in the comments who you think is the better savior of humanity, Jesus Christ or Gamera. And you can follow us on PlanetCrunch.com, our blog. You can follow us on Planet Crunch podcast and blog on Facebook. We have a TikTok, and we're on YouTube here. If you haven't found this too strange, that's a wrap.